Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today we're going to start Little Blue Book number 354, and it is titled The Absurdities of Christian Science, and is written by Joseph McCabe. And I do believe there is no copyright date, but it's more likely copyrighted in the 1920s. The last McCabe book I read was 1926. Okay, so here we go. Here's the table of contents for the absurdities of Christian Science. Chapter 1, On Christian Twaddle. Chapter 2, The Gospel According to Mary. Chapter 3, Borrowing a Revelation. Chapter 4, The Cost of Simplicity. And Chapter 5, Religion on Business Lines. Well, let's get into it. Let's see here. All right, Chapter 1, The On Christian Twaddle. I have a tiny museum in which a small meteorite from the infinite lies by a fragment of sacred literature from the imperial palace at Peking. A bit of gold which I brought up from a Bendigo mine keeps company with sacrificial fragments picked up on the margin of a sacred pool in Yucatan. A censer from an abbey of nearly 1,000 years ago hangs amongst grim Malaysian weapons. And the most innocent-looking, yet most deadly object in this casual collection of souvenirs of travel is a bunch of small bits of bone, perforated and tied together, crudely engraved with barbaric dots and designs. They are the precious apparatus of a Zulu witch doctor. And natives who shrugged their shoulders at the blood-stained jambok which lies beside them once shuddered and trembled at thought of these yellow fragments of bone. When the weird-looking magician pointed those bones at a man, some deadly influence crept gradually through his vitals, and he sickened and died. Before me also are photographs of the witch doctor of the Australian Aborigines, and the painted bones and stones he used for the same purpose. At that almost lowest level of human culture, where men could not count beyond 3 and never grew an ear of corn, the power of the magic doctor was supreme. When a man was ill, although no visible spear had made him a little bit dead, as the natives say, the magic doctor had to find and defeat the cause of it. He used no drugs. The cause of disease were invisible, or, as higher folk say, spiritual. The cause of most things were spiritual. If your neighbor had, you suspected, been tampering with your wife while you were hunting, you employed the magic doctor. If the culprit was a bigger man than yourself, and the witch pointed his death bone or shell at the man shuddering behind his windscreen, and in most cases he sickened and very often died. He was poisoned mentally. Invisible forces were the real forces, the most effective forces. All over Australia and Melanesia, all over Africa and primitive Asia and America, it was the same thing. It was the early state of man, the spirit stage of human development. All over the world, all through history, you find the superstition lingering. Babylonian temple remains show that even in that great civilization, the causes and cures of diseases were overwhelmingly spiritual. As their fathers had said ages before history dawned, so in the wonderful city of Babylon they believed that when a man was ill, he was out of harmony with the greater spirits and lesser spirits. And lesser spirits had been permitted to vex him, and prayers and incantations were more efficacious than drugs. Far away in the frozen north of Asia, men had, and have, the same ideas. Every disease, even syphilis, when it came along, had a spirit cause, and the shaman was the man to cure it. Amongst the Eskimos, it is the Angakok. Butchered the shit out of that one. Angakok, who must be summoned to the bedside of a patient and try to coax the soul back into him. The intensity of this belief at the Australian level shows that it was the general belief of the race 100,000 years ago. With civilization, men began to use common sense and to confine the invisible magic of the priest to invisible things. Disease was too important to be left to such hazards. Then, common sense took the higher form, which we call science, and medical men succeeded to witch doctors and shamans. At last, in our wonderful age, science entered upon its real development, and the art of curing disease and prolonging life made just as much progress as any other practical art of modern times. And just at this point, in one of the leading civilizations, a theory was put out that medical science was all wrong and the witch doctors and shamans were substantially right. This theory is Christian Science. Yes, I know, there are considerable differences. Christian Science says that disease does not exist, and it makes millions of dollars by curing disease, and its most plausible claim to notice is its boast that it cures disease. Christian Science says that matter does not exist, and it has the most material economic organization of all the bunches of weird ideas and practices which men call religions. Christian Science does not deck its shamans in paint and feathers, but in Prince Albert's and bedside manner. But it is substantially the same thing. The cause of disease, if there is any disease, is spiritual. Drugs and doctors, which don't exist as there is no matter, are useless against it, and the action of spirit on spirit is the only cure for the disease that doesn't exist. It is quite true that primitive peoples did not say these things. They said that spirit acted on the body. But what do you expect at the level of the Australian Aborigines? This new version of a very old superstition is called science, and its chief peculiarity is that it rejects and ridicules science in its most representative and most respected branch. Philosophers and even theologians are good enough to allow that science is the most effective application of the modern mind in its proper sphere, which is the material world. But science, they say, becomes quite impotent when it attempts to deal with the spiritual things. Nor do the scientific men profess the least anxiety to investigate spiritual things, if there are any. But all our dictionaries and manuals are turned upside down by this little clique of word spinners. Science, they say, is the same thing as metaphysics. It has nothing to do with the material world. Induction and experiment are not its implements. The scientific attitude is to buy a book and put on blinkers and look neither to right nor left at what any other book says. The fundamentalist is, of course, quite ridiculous when he maintains that the Bible is the supreme and only authority, because the Bible is, in his opinion, merely the Word of God. It is a quite different thing, quite scientific, to pin your faith to the word of Miss Eddy. Not only is this science, but it is Christian Science. The 400 million people who call themselves Christians are all wrong, and the billions who have so described themselves for 1,500 years were all wrong. The Spirit, which has revealed so much to a little clique in America in the 19th century, kept its valuable secret of the way to secure bodily and spiritual health from the whole of humanity all through the period of civilization. It placidly contemplated the perversion of men's ideas for thousands of years, and the more intelligent men were, the more perverse their ideas were. Only one man knew the truth, Christ, and so the New new movement is Christian. That is to say, this movement is as solvently intellectually in the first part of its name as it is in the second, just at the time when even theologians were beginning to see that, whatever we know about Christ, his supposed healing miracles must be put aside as legendary. The new school takes those miracles as the very essence of Christianity. There is, of course, not the slightest analogy between even what Christ is supposed to have done and what the Christian Science shaman does today. Nowhere is it said that Christ sat by the sick or prayed with or for the sick or concentrated his mind on the sick. For Christ, sin was the most terrible of realities. So terrible that there was a material eternal hell for sinners, a worm that died not and a fire that was never quenched. For Christ, disease was a very material thing, and not his primary concern. To save men from hell was his mission. And the spirit which told him of hell tells Miss Etty that there is none. Christ did heal the sick occasionally. I mean, the only account of Christ that exists represents him as doing this occasionally. But in so doing, he did precisely the opposite of what the Christian Science healer does. He acted on bodies, not minds, for he could cure the insane and quicken the dead as easily as cure toothache. He acted instantaneously, not by a series of $5 sittings. If at any time he did anything beyond an instantaneous magical act, it was to spit on clay and make a poultice, or something of that kind. Pardon me. However, as our press and police are still Christian, if our people are not, it was desirable that the new movement should call itself Christian. If you desire science, and outrage every rule and canon of it, yet call yourself scientist, what does it matter if you despise 9/10 of what Christ represented and keep only the 1/10, which we are pretty sure he did not represent? Somebody once imagined the feelings of Christ if he came to Chicago. Let us amplify it. The shows and movies would shock him. The elevated and the The elevated and the automobiles would bewilder him. The pink silk stockings would make him bilious. But of all his astounding experiences, he would say that the most surprising was when he came across an elegant building with the sign entitled Church of Christ Scientist. One's amazement increases when one reflects that these Christian scientists are not little groups of third-rate villages or working-class suburbs, but people who pride themselves on their intellectual superiority. It is another little difference from the Galilean, the new maxim, the word of Mary is, wherever one or two people with plenty of dollars are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. The new religion, the real Christianity, is the richest in the world in proportion to its membership. Christ's Christianity was the poorest, and it does not waste its wealth on silk vestments and silver candlesticks. It divides it amongst the apostles. It does not raise millions to make the word of Mary, the life-giving gospel, available to the stenographer, the chairwoman, and the heathen Chinese. It raises millions out of the sale of the word of Mary. Let me not be understood to mean that it is intellectually snobbish. It is more interested in your bank book, this being more spiritual, than in your library. The very simplest in mind are welcome to its ministrations. In fact, the simpler the better, provided they have the proper spiritual qualifications of loose dollars. Why, when I was in Los Angeles in February of 1926, even a charming young Hollywood actress died on their hands. When I was in Chicago, I was consulted by ladies who were pressed to buy shares in the estate of Baron Drake, who never existed, and were assured that the purchase money would, besides yielding 1,000%, go to Christian Science, and at the same time, in some mysterious way, pay the low cost of securing this legendary estate. While it is a slander that Christian Science requires a certain intellectual or cultural standard in its scientist, it follows from its expensiveness that, on the whole, It seeks converts in those sections of society where hereditary wealth and culture are understood to go together. Christ did that, of course. In the city of London, where I wrote this, there are only 3 churches of Christ Scientist, and they are all in the exclusive quarter where gold and silk and perfume and similar spiritual things are concentrated. Pseudo-Christian and unscientific bodies like Methodists and Baptists are left to build chapels in the districts where men earn less than $50 a week. It proves at least that they are not scientific. But what would you? Wealth and poverty do not really exist. Mind alone exists. The Word of Mary says so. In fact, says nothing else. I shall return momentarily. Oops. There we go. I had to seek hydration to cure a quick onset of cottonmouth. Not to partake in things that increase the likelihood of cottonmouth returning. All right, here we go. But surely, wait a minute. We have not yet finished with the broad paradoxes of the movement. It is just another of these broad paradoxes that Christian Science is the most dogmatic, authoritative, book-written religion in the world. Yet, I hope, half its adherents regard what the book says and all honest lecturing out of it as unmitigated twaddle. A large number of them really are infected with the ancient metaphysical superstition or formula, the central doctrine of the book that mind or spirit alone exist. We shall deal with that presently. Even these are involved in mental contortions which must excite the admiration of the indignant Hindu Farkas. Indignant Hindu Farkas. Fakir, I don't know. Fakirs. Almost like fuckers. Who haunt Chicago and Los Angeles. The majority, to judge by friends of mine who have joined the religion, think that Mary was, generally speaking, an ass, and that the official exponents of her creed do their best with a very difficult case. They think that Christ was quite a well-meaning person in his time, though with shocking social and economic views. All that concerns them is that Christian Science does cure people or make them happy. What, they ask, is in a name? The last but one paradox of the thing is that this new revelation from God to suffering humanity, this quintessence of spirituality, is maintained and spread by as soulless a business organization as the religious world has ever known. I should not accuse any priesthood as a body of simplicity. In fact, when any apostle of any idealism tells you that he is indifferent to money, look well after your wallet. But all these other organizations are guileless in comparison to the Boston junta and the local juntas in the wealthy quarters of great cities, which control the new religion of dollars don't exist. There is not another idealism in the world that knows so well how to invest $500 in order to get $5,000, or that so firmly refuses to invest the $500 unless there is a good prospect of $5,000. All religions today are business organizations. Their ideas would not survive 2 more generations if their vitality depended upon their own worth. A religion is essentially a body of men called priests who will starve if they do not persuade a sufficiently large number of people that the commodity they sell is useful. That's so true. But the new religion is more empty of ideas than any that preceded it. In reality, there is no religion about it. The only chance of survival that it has is to persuade the world with money, that it is a therapeutic body. It has a panacea that will cure your sins or your sorrows or your measles. It will persuade you that your cancer does not exist and then bury you quite prettily. It will reduce your cholera or your affection for the parlor maid. It has a pill made out of bread, crumbs, and sugar, but everybody knows that lavish advertising and business organization enable a few thousand people to thrive on such a pill for quite a long while. You remember Boccaccio's story of the relic monger whose feathers from the archangel Gabriel's wing were stolen by wags and replaced with a few cinders? It made no difference. The coals made at once coals from the fire which burned St. Lawrence, and the dimes dropped in. The last paradox is that the gospel, or philosophy of reality, which at least gives an air of spirituality and wisdom to this business enterprise, comes from a woman whose ignorance was colossal and whose faculty for consecutive thought and plain exposition was at the sophomore level. There are still people who believe in that English religious fanatic Jonas Southcott, 1750 to 1814. But they are uneducated people. The paradox of Christian Science is that tens of thousands of educated women listen with reverence to the reading from Science and Health of the most ghastly twaddle that ever cost $5. But we will now take our paradoxes one by one, and you shall see whether I have misrepresented this weird mixture of cant and culture, of bunk and business, which is bold enough to bear the outrage on its brazen front and call itself Christian Science. I love this guy's use of twaddle. Alright, that's the end of chapter 1. Where are we? 21 minutes? Alright, let's get into chapter 2. The Gospel according to Mary. Science and Health, with key to the Scriptures, is the golden book of the new revelation, the Word of Mary. The canon of revealed writings is really closed at last. It consists of the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Newest Testament, or the writings of Miss Mary Baker Eddy, of which the above is the chief. 18 centuries of Christian fathers and scholars and mystics had quite misunderstood Christianity. The fools actually thought that the chief message of Christ was that his spirit had taken flesh in the womb of a virgin, and he had died on the cross, whereas matter is a mere figment of the imagination. In the fullness of time, Mary was selected for the long-delayed final and explicit revelation. Why it was so long delayed is not explained. Even Christ had made a hash of the revelation which the Spirit tried to communicate through him. He obviously never dreamed that matter does not exist, and his followers blundered still worse with the slender truth he did tell. There are to be no more blunders. Mary closes the canon with the staff of a policeman. Any variation from or addition to her golden words in the new religion is worse than a blasphemy. It is illegal. You can cut off from the stream of dollars the river of life. When one first opens this sacred book, which one finds put on a rather higher pedestal than the Bible itself, one distrusts one's power of understanding the new religion. The old Bible is at all events given to us in magnificent English. The new Bible is a nightmare from the literary point of view. The current version has been drastically rewritten by a mere man, but I open a copy of the first edition of it and, leaning on the sustaining infinite with loving trust, the trials of today are brief and tomorrow is big with blessings. I gather that Mary, when she was little Mary, was never taught that unpleasant pastime which most of us had to suffer in the primary school called parsing and analyzing. It never occurred to her that the real construction of the first phrase of the long-awaited and awe-inspiring revelation is, the trials of today, leaning on the sustaining infinite, are brief. That sort of thing runs through the whole work. In fact, it is recorded that Mary's most favored prayer, the Lady's Prayer, so to say, was, clad in the panoply of divine love, human hatred cannot reach me, which really means, of course, human hatred clad in the panoply of divine love, etc. For a moment one wonders whether the gifted sereneness is not merely claiming a sort of ultra-poetic license in transposing words. But no, even variety of outrage is perpetuated on the decencies of grammar. A few lines later, in a scintillating reference to a cradled obscurity that shall waken a world. I have been awakened by light, but never by obscurity, even cradled. Later again, we learn that the emanations of soul are purity, harmony, and immortality. Immortality as an emanation is a new idea. Every page you turn over has gems of this sort. The idols of civilization are more fatal to health and longevity than the idols of other forms of heathen bondage. According to accepted theories, the genus Homo ranges from dust to deity, the latter having its origin in matter, while the different varieties of man are mineral, vegetable, and animal. Oh my God. Okay. Hydration. I'm glad I never read Christian Science. That is the kind of howler that little girls of 9 and 10 write after the school mom has given them a playfully learned dissertation on things in general. Mary contrives to tell us that we generally believe that God had its origin in matter, not matter in God, that dust comes under the genus Homo, that there are mineral and vegetable men, and all sorts of things that we did not know. How much simpler it would have been to say, like common folk, that man is generally believed to have a body and a soul. But everybody knew that. And even in these few extracts, you get glimpses of the second distressing feature of the new gospel, the colossal ignorance of the writer. In the preface itself, you are staggered by a reference to the longevity of our antediluvians, as a proof that health was better and life longer before medical science was born. Golden words of this sort, selling at $1 an ounce, listened to with rapt expression by hundreds of college-trained ladies all over America, masquerading as the only real science. You might think that in this one instance, Mary had swallowed the camel of the age of Methuselah as a sort of desperate reminder that men were healthier before we poured drugs into them, not because she is really so grossly ignorant of the state of scholarship as regards the Old Testament. But you have evidence of the same unfathomable ignorance on every page. A woman who sets out to teach the world the very truth about health and medical science might be expected to make some inquiry into actual facts. She would have found that we already, on the average, live twice as long since modern medicine took us in hand, and that her patriarchs and healthy savages are long discredited fiction. But we will make some allowance for the state of spiritual exhortation. Wait. What? However did you think of the general culture of a woman who can write this? The history of the Chinese Empire derives its antiquity and renown from the truer idea of the Buddhist entertains of God. It is bad enough that she should still hold the exploded legend about the antiquity of the Chinese Empire, but what do you think of an educated person, or educated persons who listen to her, who does not know that 1, Buddha was born 2,000 years after the founding of the Chinese Empire, and 2, Buddha did not believe in God, and he told people not to bother about souls and spirits. 3, Chinese Buddhism is not Buddhism, not early, and not in the least the ethical inspiration of China. 4, morality and disease are appalling in China and India. From cover to cover, the Golden Book displays the same colossal ignorance. The woman has not nearly the culture of a thoughtful chauffeur or stenographer. She has a section on psychology and has not taken the trouble to read 50 lines about it in an encyclopedia. She thinks physics is the science of medicine. All her knowledge of science is contained in mineral, vegetable, and animal, a phrase of the primary school or infant school manuals of 70 or 80 years ago. Of history she knows nothing. The Bible she accepts blindly in its most discredited statements and rejects in its essential teaching. Of social or economic science, she is as innocent as a hobo, while her inarticulate and ungrammatical mumbling seems to show that she never even read ordinary literary works. This guy doesn't like her at all, does he? Does he? That the works of such a woman should be the golden book of tens of thousands of women on whom a college education has been wasted is one of the phenomena of our age. Science and health is a sustained shriek of ignorance in the face of all that is modern. There is no physical science, and psychology is anti-Christian. I suppose that these devout congregations of daintily clad ladies with fragrant bodies still wear the ecstatic expression when Miss Eddy condemns even the bath. I do not suppose they are allowed to smile when it is solemnly read out that when Christian Science is complete, there will be no need to eat and drink or to sigh, even when they hear that in these days there will be no sexual intercourse and the race will be maintained spiritually. All that blessed word spiritual. Everything is forgiven because the book is such a tremendous revelation of the dominance of spirit. Jesus, who wisely wrote nothing, was a carpenter, Paul a tailor, Muhammad a camel driver. But we overlook every limitation of culture because of their grand doctrine of spirit. They were honest men, and in the case of Miss Eddy, the greatest prophet of them all, we have, as we shall see, to overlook the fact that she was dishonest, that were in their conduct true to their anti-materialistic gospels, and she gathered dollars in what dollars could buy as assiduously as any stockbroker, but we overlook it all. She impressed upon a materialistic world that spirit only exists, that therefore spiritual healing from sin or sorrow or the illusion of disease is the only healing. Christian Scientists will wrongly say that on some of my pages I am not fair to the religion, but they will admit that I am right here. The fundamental doctrines are defined by Miss Eddy. 1. God is all in all. 2. God is good. God is mind. 3. God, spirit, belong all. Nothing is matter. 4. Life, God, omnipotent, good, deny death, evil, sin, disease. Disease, sin, evil, death, deny good, omnipotent, God, life. And from these principles derive the two practical consequences which reconcile even some cultivated men and women to the grotesque statements on so many other points of Miss Eddy. The negative consequences is that since disease is only a brief or illusion, it is removed by the action of mind or spirit. The positive consequence, and probably most of the really cordial and sensible members would put this above all, is that by cultivating the spirit in all its fullness, you obtain peace, joy, courage, serenity, and happiness in a measure beyond what you get in any other religion. We will consider these practical consequences presently. The first is a gross fallacy, but like some other fallacies, it seems to act occasionally in practice. The second is a simple piece of self-hypnotism. But let us first consider the principles themselves. I need not say that in such a matter as this, the practical effect has no bearing on the question of the truth of the principles. 100 different religions with contradictory tenets inspire in certain types of character just the same serenity, courage, and joy. The Stoic ethic, which ridiculed the very idea of spirit, was just as inspiring as any spiritual religion that ever existed. And the main character of Miss Eddy, the main doctrine of Miss Eddy, that all reality is spiritual and matter does not exist, is unmitigated twaddle, and very ancient twaddle. We shall see presently how Miss Eddy came by it, and how she lied about its origin. She learned it from a man who is today totally unknown. while she who borrowed it and denied the borrowing sits on the left hand of the Father Almighty. This man began as a mesmerist, and brooding over its supposed powers gave him an exaggerated idea of the capabilities of mind, which of course he called spirit. But we shall see this in the next chapter. Even in the pseudo-philosophic form which slightly distinguishes Miss Eddy's doctrine from that of the Zulu or the Australian witch doctor, the idea is as old as thought. Pythagoras and his pupils said it in the very dawn of Greek thought, and the Neoplatonists held it in the last days of the race. The Eleatic thinkers had much the same ideas. The Gnostics were so saturated with them that the Church had again and again to condemn the idea that matter was a figment, and so Christ was not really incarnated. As the modern philosophy, it has been steeped in idealism, or the doctrine that mind alone exists, for more than a century. The question whether matter exists, or can be proved to exist, or what can be proved to exist, filled half the philosophical literature of the world before Miss Eddy saw a gleam of gold in the idea. Bishop Berkeley's name is surely familiar to the reading public. No. Maybe then. Pantheism, or the all-in-all idea, was equally familiar. Half a century before Miss Eddy could spell the word physiology, German humorists were characterizing Fichte's system of thought by drawing a goose with liver so much enlarged for petit foie gras that the poor bird was saying, which is I and which is not I. Makes no sense. Even in philosophy, there has been a reaction. In the works of philosophers, we understand the tendency to regard matter as a belief because it is important to give any direct proof of the existence of a material world. But the indirect approach to the question is so decisive that philosophers have had to yield. I explained in another book that not only are our sciences, astronomy, evolution, biology, etc., become quite insipid unless you admit not only a material world, but a precise and perfectly definite knowledge of it, but history and all culture become just as ridiculous. Okay. Yeah. All right, we're going to stop there. That's the end of part 1 of Little Blue Book number 354, The Absurdities of Christian Science, written by Joseph McCabe sometime in the 1920s. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 2.